Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. If you're a visitor, welcome to our parish. If you have a chance afterwards or to go visit the church and see it's a beautiful church and visit our Lord there, you're welcome to do that. I'm Father Anthony Saroki. I'm the pastor of the parish. This is Chuck LiMandri from the Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund. He has his own practice as well. We're going to get more into his background in a little bit. I wanted to do this a little different than just having him come in and be a speaker. I wanted to do it in the form of a conversation where he and I will talk about things. And now, I have to confess that before I was a priest, I was an attorney as well. So, and I'm, 2 years of practicing law and 20 years of penance now, I think, for that. So, but I wanted to conduct this, first of all, and there will be chances for questions at the end, but I want to conduct this conversation in a way, not just between two lawyers maybe, but I'm going to try to, explain things that might seem basic to us and ask Chuck to explain things that might seem basic. Not to be condescending to you guys, but just, it may not be an area that you have, particular expertise in. It still might be a lot of information, so, we'll do our best, though, to keep it accessible. We're going to start in just a minute, but let's just take a moment and pray and be aware of God's presence here. And Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for gathering us this evening for the blessings of this day that we've received. We ask your help in the struggles in our life that we face now. We thank you for revealing yourself to us in many ways, of putting in our heart a desire to know you, to know absolute goodness and beauty and truth, and how you give us the freedom to respond to that revelation, the freedom to believe in you, to love you, and to serve you. We thank you for the blessing of living in a country which, at least for most of her history, has been encouraging of that freedom to worship you and to serve you. We ask you, please, to help us this evening to grow in our knowledge and understanding of these issues of religious liberty and what's happening in our culture and our legal system. I pray for Chuck, who's graciously offered himself tonight to share his knowledge and experience, and for myself, that our conversation and those as they listen to it may lead us to grow more in the truth. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So Chuck, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here, Father.
I want to start out by, I want you to share a little bit of your background. First of all, how did you get into religious liberty law?
After practicing law for about 20 years, I decided it was time to try to give back to the community that I love. I'm a native San Diegan. So I took advantage of the opportunity to do some pro bono and free legal work with the Thomas More Law Center, which was a national Catholic public interest law firm in 2003. One of the first things we did was a friend of the court brief called an amicus brief on the issue concerning keeping under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then
that was being challenged. Someone said that
that someone was saying that as Mr. Newdow at the time suing in Elk Grove in Sacramento, and it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Fortunately, we prevailed, and the court held that is appropriate to give acknowledgement. It's not necessarily forcing anybody to worship a certain way, but it is acknowledging that part of our culture and our history to have under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. So that was one of the cases in which the good guys did prevail. And then about 2004, I've been following the Mount Soledad Cross case and read the paper that the city and the Mount Soledad Memorial Association is going to throw in the towel and take the cross down.
So let's just assume, if some people don't know. So this is a big cross, right? That's up on public land.
Yes, at that time it was,
and what was
city land.
What was its purpose, or what?
The Mount Soledad Cross was built in 1954 by veterans returning for the Korean War to honor their fallen comrades that they left behind.
So it's like a war memorial.
Exactly correct. It's a 23-foot cross located in La Jolla. You can see it from Highway 5. And it was originally intended, like I said, for the veterans of the one war, but as time went by, It was used as a symbol to memorialize the sacrifices of veterans of all U.S. wars, and they've now built walls and plaques. If you haven't been up there, I really encourage you to do that. I think there's some 4,000 plaques commemorating the service of veterans going all the way back to the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and current conflicts in the Middle East. So it took on national importance. It ended up being, I think, the longest running religious liberty fight in the history of the United States, 27 years. I was actively involved for 12 years of that, mainly as a lead counsel.
And this took so long because it would go through the court system and then it would be sent back by an appellate court back to the trial judge, and then...
Well, every time we lost, we would change tactics, like the other side.
Oh, okay. All right.
So when the court found that it couldn't be on state land because the state constitution is restrictive of religious symbols, then we lobbied Congress and got our
and this would be more having to do with the Establishment Clause, right?
That's exactly
the other
correct.
part of the First Amendment, religious part, which is that the Congress will not establish. Okay. So so that was a long battle. And so how did that finally resolve? And when did that resolve?
So it went from city land to federal land.
Okay.
They challenged it under the federal constitution. And finally, we were able to arrange a private sale where the Mount Soledad Memorial Association was able to buy it. So now that's private land.
Okay.
Just like the cross in La Mesa.
So some kind of nonprofit now holds title to the land.
And they built it, and they've maintained it, and they've always wanted to have ownership, interest in it. So it worked out very well for the veterans who built it and for our community. That cross is going to be there now for time immemorial.
So, and that when that started, did you expect that this was going to be a 20-year thing?
I had no idea.
Okay.
I had no idea I was getting myself into, and of course I didn't have the nonprofit then, so I was pretty much financing the whole thing myself when I was up against an army of lawyers with the ACLU. So it was
So you didn't have the backing of a big national nonprofit that's dedicated to these kinds of things. Okay.
No, I mean we had various lawyers around the country who were volunteering some time, but we didn't have the organized effort that the ACLU did in terms of having.
So there's a little bit of David and Goliath in terms of the legal,
Very
money
much
into.
so.
Yeah,
but it's interesting. The city of San Diego, the community really rallied, and we had an election. We got 76% of the vote. That mobilized the politicians.
So there was a vote where people expressed their approval of having the cross
remain, and actually
76%. Okay.
That's correct. And once the people spoke, and that's a good thing about our system, the politicians, will listen. And they got behind it, and we got the support we need to get the legislation passed to preserve it.
Okay. So now take me from your involvement there now to the other religious freedom and establishment cases you've been involved in.
Sure. So having gotten a taste for this kind of work and having had more people ask me to handle more kinds of cases like this, we ended up starting the Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund in 2012 so that we could be able to have the resources in terms of the people to be able to staff these cases.
So let me stop you. How did you choose, or who chose that name, Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund? Or how did you?
We formed a board of mostly Catholic supporters in town, and we discussed it, and that was the name that we came up with among various options. And
this was formed because you started seeing these cases were coming up, and you also anticipated there'd be more in the future, or was it?
Sure. California was ground zero, and surprisingly, a lot was coming out of San Diego at the time. So for that reason alone, we figured that we were probably in the right place at the right time, and now we're probably doing more of this kind of work in terms of actual attorneys located in California than most any other firm.
Okay. Why is this important to you?
It's important to me because I've got 5 kids. Most of us here have kids or grandkids. We've had the privilege and opportunity of growing up in what I believe, and I'm sure all of you agree, the greatest country in the history of the world because of our rights and our freedoms, particularly our right to worship, as we've had the opportunity and privilege of doing all of our lives. We want that for our children and grandchildren. And quite frankly, it's under attack. It's by no means guaranteed, the way some of these court cases have come down, that the rights that we've always enjoyed and taken advantage will be there for our children and grandchildren. So for that reason alone, I have 5 kids, I got a grandchild now, I want for them what we've had, and I want our church not to suffer. Our church has been in the crosshairs, I think, for a while, and will continue to be, because as long as we stand up for the truth as it's been revealed to us with good priests like you guiding us. And there's going to be people who not only disagree with us, but to a certain extent, hate us for our beliefs.
Tell me about that. People on the other side of this, what personally have you experienced in terms of comments or other things, threats or anything that you've experienced?
There's a lot of vitriol and name calling in terms of people calling you a bigot or something like that. And I've been called the most anti-gay lawyer in town because I defend religious liberty of Christians, and quite frankly, the way the laws have been going, the greatest conflict is between religious liberty of Christians and gay activists who want Christians to do things that go against our sincerely held religious beliefs. So, it's not pleasant for people to ascribe to you motives or attributes that are simply not true to who you are. My motivation is, as a devout Catholic, standing up for my faith and standing up for the truth, as 20 years of Catholic education has taught it to me, because Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and if you stand up and acknowledge him before men, he'll acknowledge you before his Father. That's my ultimate motivation, is to honor that belief system and to honor God.
Okay, but let's say they call you a hater or a bigot, and let's say they really, they think you're a bad person because you're doing this. Maybe they don't even listen, but if you had a chance to explain to them why you're not a hater or why you're not a bigot, I think those are very unfair labels just to throw on someone.
Sure.
But how would you
realize that the labels are used to shut down debate, because really, when you get into a discussion of these issues, particularly on the whole same-sex marriage thing, our side would invariably win those debates. So they've kind of just stopped debating us and just started using name-calling to try to shut down the debate. But you try to respond with compassion and sensitivity and explain your point of view to the extent they're willing to listen. Oftentimes, they're not willing to listen, but that's the best that you can do. So there's a lot of people that will listen, but you can't come across as a crazy person or as some kind of zealot. That's why you have to try to be calm and deliberate in the way you explain.
But the word hate or hater, to me it connotes someone who has some kind of malice and wants to harm someone else.
Right, so it's a rational prejudice, not based upon anything but some type of fear, or as you said, dislike. It's got nothing to do with that. We're Christians. We're called to love everyone, but by the same token, we're not supposed to compromise the truth. And so, speak the truth in love, and that's what we try to do.
So before we get into talking about this famous Supreme Court case now that recently came out, Masterpiece Cake Shop, I do want to offer some of the Catholic teaching on this. So the most important document of Catholic teaching regarding religious liberty is called Dignitatis Humanae, which was a document from the Second Vatican Council. So I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs, short paragraphs, because I think it's good for us to know as Catholics, what does our church teach on religious liberty? So the Vatican, this is from paragraph 2, the Vatican Council declares that the human person has a right to religious freedom. This freedom means that all men are to be immune from coercion on the part of individuals or social groups and of any human power in such wise that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, within due limits. So it's a very broad statement there, but if you read the document, there are some limits that are talked about, and this is the most important paragraph regarding the limits, I think. Talking about the government action is to be controlled by juridical norms. This is when the government is to act in ways that might impinge religious freedom. To be governed by juridical norms which are in conformity with objective moral order. These norms arise out of the need for the effective safeguard of the rights of all citizens and for the peaceful settlement of conflicts of rights. Also out of the need for an adequate care of genuine public peace, which comes about when men live together in good order and in true justice, and finally out of the need for a proper guardianship of public morality. So Church envisions that people shouldn't be allowed legally necessarily to do anything that any religion says they should do. So the Church would be fine, for example, with laws restricting marriage to two people. So Mormons and Muslims, their religion may allow them to have more than one wife. I think it only works the one way, right? A man can have multiple wives. I don't think it works both ways. So, Mormons no longer teach that, but they did at the founding, right? Islam still teaches that. So the Catholic Church would say a society that has some Mormons, Muslims would not have to allow plural marriages because they go against objective morality and the good of public order. So there are limits even in the church teaching to religious freedom. And I should note the church's teaching on religious freedom has evolved and developed over time, and that's a whole other topic of how that happened and things like that, but I'm aware of that too, in case you're thinking, well, this is kind of new for the church. It's rooted in principles that existed before, but it really took some time and the work of the Holy Spirit, and honestly, the American experience was extremely influential for all the bishops that gathered at Vatican II. We called them the Council Fathers. The fact that at the time the church in the U.S. was one of the strongest churches in Western society, and it didn't have an established Catholic state-run religion. It had freedom of religion. The Catholic Church was doing very well, and I think that helped to influence the Church Fathers and say, this can be a good thing. On the other hand, there was the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, which was prohibiting religious practice, and the church wanted to speak for those persecuted religious people of faith there. So that's the church's teaching on religious freedom. So I want you, please, Chuck, if you would, summarize the facts of the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision first. What was going on in the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision?
Sure. The two gay men sought to have Jack Phillips in Lakewood, Colorado, make a wedding cake for their same-sex wedding. And at that time, Colorado didn't even recognize same-sex.
So this wouldn't have been a legal wedding in that sense. No. It would be like a ceremony that they were
going to go to Massachusetts to get married.
Okay.
They'd come back and have the reception.
Gotcha.
And that's in fact what they did. But Jack Phillips is a devout evangelical Christian and said he could not in good conscience do that. And as a result of that, they ended up bringing a lawsuit against him, and the Colorado Civil Rights Commission actually.
So this is like an administrative body in Colorado where one of the things they deal with if someone feels that they were discriminated against in commerce or in other kind of public accommodation situations, they could complain to this government entity.
Exactly.
And the government entity would then do what to the person?
Supposedly investigate the case, and if they believe it's a legitimate case of discrimination, then they can take action in terms of fining or issuing some other type of order, which is in fact what they did here. They issued fines, and then they said that he would have to have himself and his staff undergo instruction, sensitivity training or whatever, so that they would no longer engage in that type of discrimination, and then have to do reporting to make sure that they were not in fact discriminating in the future. Jack Phillips continued to maintain that he had a right under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees a free exercise of religion. Remember, our country was founded by religious refugees, so it was very important for them to have the first right in the First Amendment, the free exercise of religion, which is why it's kind of crazy that we're having to talk about this, because throughout the entire history of the nation, there was never a question that people had the right to exercise a conscientious objection to something that was going to go against their sincerely held religious beliefs. But in light of what the U.S. Supreme Court did in the Obergefell decision by allowing gay marriage, it's wrought all of this conflict. And this was predicted.
Okay. I want to go back to Jack Phillips. So what I read about the case also is that but he discontinued doing wedding cakes, which was a huge chunk of his business, because
like 40% of his business.
While this was all going on, he stopped doing that. So he lost a lot of business from that.
He lost a lot of business.
And I guess the idea was if he does no weddings at all, he can't be accused of discriminating against same-sex weddings.
Exactly correct. And plus, the gay couple was able to get another local Colorado baker to make their wedding cake, so they were not in any way
so his denial of service didn't slow down their wedding or stop their wedding reception or slave? Okay.
No, but they still wanted to make a point and force him to say that he should be making wedding cakes for gay couples.
So let's talk about Jack Phillips. Does he refuse, let's say if, well, I don't know if there was any cases, if lesbians, two women who were in a relationship together came to him and wanted a birthday cake for their adopted daughter.
He had no problem serving gay people in any other capacity, any other good or service they may want. It's only the wedding cake itself.
And let's talk about that.
Sure.
What, in the ways how did he express why he objected to creating a cake for the same-sex
For two
ceremony?
reasons, and it's the same reasons if we talk about the pastries case, and I believe...
We will later.
Okay. Basically, a wedding cake is unique. All of us have been to weddings. Oftentimes, it's kind of the centerpiece of a wedding, and they're always almost always custom to wedding cakes. The customer chooses the size and the color and the taste. And for the baker, it's a work of art. It takes many hours to design and make a wedding cake, usually. It's not like just buying a stock cake off the shelf, typically. And so in order to go through that form of artistic expression, it can and should be looked at as a form of speech. And the argument was that under the First Amendment, not only your religious freedom is protected, but your right to speech, and that includes expressive speech. So speech obviously is speaking,
Yeah, but what did
or it could be sculpture.
What did he have against doing that? What?
Because his belief is marriage is fundamentally, as God ordained it, between a man and a woman.
And so
by changing the definition of two men or two women is going directly against the biblical precept of what God made as foundational for the human race.
And he felt that by being forced to make a cake for this, he would be forced to participate in or express approval of something which he thought was not right.
Exactly. Be speaking a message to which he did not agree. Okay. And that's a constitutional guarantee. We should not be forced to speak in a way that we do not agree.
Okay,
certainly not on religious.
Let's talk about what did the Supreme Court decide in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case?
Yeah, they kind of punted a bit because they did not make the clear decision that we hoped they would make, that making a wedding cake is a form of expressive speech. They could have done that. But on the other hand, they didn't do what the other side wanted, which is to say when gay rights conflict with the rights of people of faith in this context, that the gay people always win. That's what the other side was arguing, is that you can't say no to providing some type of service involved with the wedding industry, be it a cake, or be it a florist, or be it a photographer, or now calligraphers are being sued for not doing invitations. They wanted to say that you always had to participate and could not use religion as an excuse. The good thing that came out of that Masterpiece Cake decision, which was just last month, was the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, the gay community does not always win. They didn't, unfortunately, say the Christians always win either, but they did say you have to balance the interests and weigh them and look at the facts of a particular case. Does a person really have a sincerely held religious belief? And then presumably you're going to look at, was a gay person able to get a cake somewhere else? But in this case, the determinative focus of the justice who wrote the decision, Justice Kennedy, who's just retiring now, was that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission was overtly hostile towards Jack Phillips and his Christian beliefs, and in fact compared these Christian beliefs to the excuses people gave for slavery and the Holocaust, saying, oh, you people use religion just for all kinds of discrimination. They were very hateful towards him. And even Justice Kennedy, who wrote the decision, who's been the leading proponent of gay rights on the court, did say that you cannot show overt hostility to people of faith. Now, the question is, and the opposition is saying, it's now limited to only cases where the government officials say mean things about Christians. And we're saying,
right, so let me stop. So I read the majority opinion. So the majority opinion was 7 justices were in the majority opinion. 7 and 2 did not join in that decision. And there were multiple.
It was against
and the way it works is, so what decides the case, it has to be a majority of the justices, but then oftentimes they have different reasoning or they have different other issues they're concerned about, and they write additional opinions, concurring opinions, and the people who are against what the outcome is write dissenting opinions, right? So you have several opinions in that, but the one that had the 7 votes, which was kind of the controlling thing, was by Kennedy. And I read through that, and I was less, to me it gave me less consolation than maybe it gave you, because I did feel like it really depended on the fact that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission made these very biased statements against against Jack Phillips' religious beliefs.
Right.
And that the court even said at one point, we know other cases are coming down the line, which we may have to decide, but right now we know for sure, at least because of this, that Jack Phillips should win. At least because that we know that Colorado did not neutrally consider. Now, one of the things they thought was important, I don't know if people know this, was that there had been several complaints against, I don't know the details, but there are people who wanted homosexual bakers to bake like a cake, I guess, that said one man, one woman marriage or something like that. And the Civil Rights Commission said that the gay bakers don't have to do that. They cannot be. So this was very important for the Supreme Court justices, because what they said is, this is not neutral. Okay, you're saying that here these gay bakers have a conscious objection to creating a cake that's against what they believe in, and you said they don't have to do it, but then you say that the Christian baker does. So they had a double standard. That's what I saw that really motivated.
That was part of it. Now, there was some helpful language that this shows that expressive speech can be a developing type of theory, in that the court might have to.
They just weren't ready to decide that or consider that.
And he didn't feel he had to. But quite frankly, the court's going to change now that Kennedy retired. And hopefully.
And even if Kennedy hadn't retired, they're eventually going to have to resolve this, because otherwise there's going to be, if it's only based on the government officials showing animus, well, what about if that's not there? How are you going to resolve all these cases?
That's right.
So again, I wasn't, I liked some of the concurring opinions more. I thought they were a better analysis and a better bright line rule for the future, because the only people that benefit when it's this murky kind of thing where it's not a bright line rule are lawyers, right? Because lawyers get a lot more business. I mean, there's constant lawsuits. And I think what a lot of people, how many of you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you have been involved in a lawsuit in some way? Okay, so it's a terrible experience. It takes up your time, your energy, your money. It's not, and we are a very litigious society.
Right.
I mean, and I know there's some good lawyers out there, but I'm just saying that
it's not an efficient way to resolve disputes. My two favorite lawyers, St. Thomas More and Abraham Lincoln, said always settle on your way to court. It's better than people shooting each other down the street.
No, it is. Not
much.
It is. But the Supreme Court, by not really deciding this, has invited a lot more lawsuits.
Unfortunately, they didn't want to address. Well, they could not get a majority of votes to address a tough issue.
Okay.
But I think we're going to have the right justices on the court now to get it right next time. I really do.
Okay. We'll talk about that later. So let's talk a little bit about the historical background of laws that prohibit businesses from discriminating against people based on certain characteristics. Where do those start in our nation's legal history?
I would say probably right after the Civil War, around 1968, with the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, followed up by the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equal protection of the laws for everybody, so that African Americans would have the same protection as white people, particularly in the South. And that amendment was largely the basis for key court decisions that came out moving the civil rights.
No, but was it, I can't remember from law school, was it Plessy versus Ferguson that allowed separate but equal?
Right.
So you did have in the South a regime where white business owners did not have to serve African American because they would have but the state had to make sure there was a separate public accommodations or services available.
Yes. And so basically now they have a whole host of laws called SOGI laws, sexual orientation, gender identification, and they're trying to use the same type of basis that was used as race to protect sexual orientation and gender identification. The difference is those race laws and laws like them were usually based upon inherent and immutable characteristics, such as the color of your skin, your ethnicity, your gender, which is always thought to be something immutable. Now, with sexual orientation and gender identity, everything's in flux. It's very hard to, I think, apply the same set of standards that say you were born this way, it's your biology, and people can't discriminate against you because of your race or ethnicity or your gender. But that's what's going on. They're using those laws that I think came out of the abolition.
These come, of course, from our nation's shameful history of slavery and of Jim Crow laws.
Exactly.
And this was necessary, really was,
Yes.
to help African Americans to, from suffering unjust discrimination.
Exactly.
And also being able to, I mean, the way I would think about it, I mean, if you were driving through the South and you're black, and there's only so many gas stations, and you pull up to get gas, and the guy doesn't want to serve you because of your race. I mean, that's a real hardship.
It's a hardship, sure.
You know, you go to a town, you're looking for a hotel.
Right.
And he says, you know, because there are other people, even very libertarian people, who say, well, business owners should be able to do whatever they want with their businesses, you know. But we look at that historical situation.
That's right.
And what happened,
people would,
that would be a real hardship.
People would be deprived of certain essential services.
Yeah.
Now, as it's developed certain laws, like we have in California, the Fair Employment and Housing Act and the UNU Act, specifically protect people with regard to essential services like being treated fairly in employment, health care, education, areas where people need those services.
So trying to help people be treated fairly, initially, things like race, ethnicity, sex or gender, I think religious affiliation was one of those things that was in the... And then what was added to it was sexual orientation.
Right.
And now also gender identity.
Correct.
Okay. So this has been kind of treated then, if you think about it, if you're adding that to a law that was, you know, basically trying to stop racists from denying services to ethnic or racial minorities, and you're saying now this also is covering people who, for their sexual orientation, it kind of equates that distinction.
It's not a clear fit because normally with race, it's readily observable. Normally you wouldn't know what someone's sexual orientation is unless they're making an issue of it. But so it's not a good fit, but nonetheless they've demanded the same rights based upon race.
Let me ask you this. So is there a distinction, well, let me ask, would it be right for a business owner, let's say someone has a restaurant and two men, I mean, they don't announce anything, but it looks like maybe they're a couple coming to his restaurant, maybe they're holding hands, and they want to order food. Do you think it's right for a business owner to tell them to get out and he won't serve them?
I don't think it's right. I mean, as long as they're not creating a disturbance, you know, if they're kissing or something, you know, everybody should be acting appropriately in public. But we're talking about restricting service in terms of the wedding industry because of the importance of marriage. And
right. I want to get to that distinction.
I'm making a distinction between serving people in another context, and I believe the law is going to continue to protect and probably should people from getting goods or services regardless of their
So it's a distinction between serving someone something regardless of sexual orientation versus a service which is in support of or approving of a gay marriage or approval of
31 states. 2 out of 3 Americans voted against gay marriage. It was forced on us by one vote of one justice on the U.S. Supreme Court on a 5-4 vote. And the Chief Justice said, don't celebrate the Constitution. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. We have a right to resist what we believe is fundamentally and morally wrong. I personally spent over 1,000 hours trying to get Prop 8 passed, working with Archbishop Corleone, and the Catholic community in San Diego is
Sorry, let me stop you there. Do you guys remember what Prop 8 was? So, Prop 8 was a very contentious ballot initiative back in 2008, which defined marriage as being between a man and a woman, and it was passed, even in California.
It was passed in California,
but the courts did not allow it to go into effect.
We had to beat Hollywood, the government insiders, the movie industry, the education academic establishment, and we did it because the churches all worked together.
But it was all for naught because the court threw it out.
The court reversed it. So that's why I'm saying, you know, we have a right to resist, and people are resisting, and we're called to resist.
But it's good, I think it's good for us to understand a distinction between providing a service to someone, you know, who may be same-sex attracted or identify as gay, and providing a service that is showing approval of gay marriage, right? Okay, so since we talked about what's the First Amendment? I have it here in front of me. I'm trying to put you on the spot.
It was passed in late 1700s, I think 1791. there was a concern when we adopted the federal constitution among the states that the federal government would be too powerful. So the anti-federalists wanted to make sure that there was a Bill of Rights, which was the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which the Constitution was 1787, the Bill of Rights 1791. And the First Amendment is one that guarantees free exercise of religion and freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly.
It starts off, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging freedom of speech. So it initially limited Congress. How is it that the conflicts we're talking about are not laws that are being passed by Congress, but they're state laws, like Colorado, for example?
Right.
That, how does this apply now to prevent the states, or requiring the states to respect religious freedom?
In 1925, in a U.S. Supreme Court Gillick case, the court said that the same rights that are protected from infringement by the federal government are protected by infringement
the incorporation doctrine
by the states.
And that's because the 13th and 14th, the 14th Amendment says equal protection.
Exactly.
It cannot be denied without due process. So they said, how are we going to define what that is? Due process, well, it includes at least the Bill of Rights, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
So since 1925,
so that's something, a little
it applied to
history. So that's how this Bill of Rights got to apply to the states, was through the Supreme Court started to incorporate it because of the 14th Amendment. It's kind of, they read all that into the 14th Amendment.
That's right.
All right. Now, besides the Constitution, okay, the First Amendment in the Constitution, are there other legal protections for religious freedom or conscience at, let's say first, the federal level?
Sure. In 1993, the United States Congress passed something called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The US RFRA.
Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Okay, what is that?
Signed by President Clinton, and I think it was actually put up by Senator Kennedy. So
this was kind of a bipartisan,
widespread bipartisan support to protect religious liberty. It came as a result of another Supreme Court case, Smith versus Employment Development Division, which was an interesting case where these Native American Indians were using peyote in terms of their religious ceremonies.
Peyote is a hallucinogenic, right? Hallucinogenic. And so they were claiming, hey, their religion says that they have to use this.
And the state said you can't do that, it's a controlled substance.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court said, well, it's a law of general applicability. They're not trying to target religion, they're just trying to control
a substance that can be dangerous to other people.
That's exactly right. So the court upheld that law, and then there was a backlash saying, well, wait a minute, these Indians have been doing this for years, and they think it's legitimate. We're going to allow them to do it. So they passed Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
In a way, so the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was in response to this, and basically it's the Congress saying, we want them to have the freedom, because it's not like someone claiming, that
they're not selling
marijuana
drugs.
is my religion right now, although now it's all legal, but this was a sincerely held belief. It wasn't really putting other people in danger. So, and now, I understand the Religious Freedom Restoration Act creates then a higher standard for government action.
If the law, what they call substantially burdens religion, then in order for the law to be upheld, they have to show there's a compelling government interest for the law, and it's the least restrictive means to accomplish the purpose.
So if the government says we want to, keep this drugs out of the hands of kids or whatever, and they say, well, there's other ways you can do it, then the person claiming the religious freedom wins, and the state loses, basically, under the federal law.
Under RFRA, if they can show there's another way to do it, you can keep drugs out of the hands of kids without prohibiting Native Americans from using peyote.
Right. Okay. So that sounds like that's a very powerful. It's more than the First Amendment. It theoretically maybe gives more protection than the First Amendment.
It gives more teeth to the First Amendment when you have one of these laws of general applicability that could otherwise burden religion. That was the purpose of it. Now, it does not apply to the states, but about 21 states have adopted their own version of the federal RFRA Act.
And in some of these states, though, who have tried to do this, where in particular, I think it was maybe Indiana, even was it Mike Pence was there?
They tried to get past it, and there was a big backlash.
And corporate America is very much against it because, frankly, they think this is primarily going to be used by Christians to not serve homosexuals.
Right.
And they actually, I think they got Indiana to back down.
Right, they did. As I recall, they made all kinds of threats against the state and how they're going to boycott it and do all these terrible things.
Okay. So,
but it hasn't worked out that way. I mean, that's not how the RFRA statutes are typically being used.
We talked a little bit about, this is obviously the news, Justice Kennedy has decided he's going to retire.
Yes.
And President Trump, I think, nominated Brett Kavanaugh.
Right.
And now, no one knows the future, but
sure.
With your crystal ball here, where do you see, how do you see the Supreme Court coming down on these religious freedom cases in the next 5-10 years?
I think the Supreme Court is much more likely to be hospitable towards religion with these new appointments. We've certainly seen it with Justices Alito and Roberts, appointed by President Bush, Justice Gorsuch, appointed by President Trump. They're very well-reasoned decisions that are consistent with our nation's
Let's talk about this. People say, well, that's just, they're conservatives and you know, and they're putting their own views into being judges and into the Constitution.
Well, the people who wrote the Constitution were conservatives. I mean, they wanted religious freedom protected first, okay? So they're being consistent with...
What's the difference between an originalist judicial philosophy and a conservative political person?
The originalist judicial philosophy is going to interpret the Constitution the way it's written, given its historical context. The progressives are going to say, we're going to interpret it any way we want. So there's really no consistency or continuity, and you get decisions like Roe v. Wade where they start making up rights that are nowhere found in the Constitution, or Obergefell, where they found same-sex marriage. They just do what they want to do. And Justice Scalia said they will do that with same-sex marriage. If they can get away with it, they'll do it. Yeah. Well, they got away with it so far.
So that's the real difference then, because let's just talk about Roe versus Wade for a second, because even though that's not exactly what the theme is tonight, you know, it's been in the press a lot that people are saying if Brett Kavanaugh gets the Senate approves the nomination, gives their advice and consent, that Roe v. Wade, it will be overturned and women will not be able to get abortions. If Roe v. Wade were overturned, and technically it's not the controlling law, there's another case that came in '92 called Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania versus Casey. But if Roe, let's just say the central holding in Roe that created out of thin air basically a right to an abortion, which basically nullified the laws of all the states regulating abortion. If Roe disappeared, would that make abortion illegal everywhere?
No, I assume it's going to go back to the states.
So basically,
the Constitution reserves to the states anything that's not specifically granted to the federal government. Abortion obviously is not in the Constitution. It would have been enacted.
So rather than judges deciding an important social question, people have to debate, compromise, come up with something we can live with together.
Social policy made by elected representatives who are more responsive to the people because they have to win the next election. These federal judges are appointed for life. And the Founding Fathers said, if they ever start taking control of the reins of government, Thomas Jefferson said it'll be an oligarchy. They'll just start ruling the country because they're not answerable to anyone. And that's not what they intended. They intended the judiciary to be the weakest branch. But because liberals could not get what they wanted from the elected representatives, they turned to the courts. And that's why all these battles are being fought out in the courts. But the judges are not supposed to be making social policy or making laws. They're supposed to be interpreting laws. And conservatives tend to appoint judges who do just that. They say they're going to do that, and they do that. They don't make laws, they interpret the laws. It's up to the legislature to make the laws.
Okay. So I want you, if you could, the distinction between government action and private action. So let's say that these men had went to a Masterpiece Cake Shop, and Jack said, listen, I'm a faithful Christian. I mean, because he doesn't do Halloween cakes, he doesn't do divorce cakes. There are other things that he doesn't want. He doesn't do. You guys wouldn't get a divorce cake? That's a great idea, right? Happy divorce? No, it's true. People ask for those things.
I think Kathy Miller, I think, is here. She doesn't do divorce cakes.
Well, my point is, it's a consistent kind of thing where there are things he doesn't want to, things that he thinks are bad or wrong. He doesn't want to. Anyways, my point is, let's say that they had come up to him. He says, listen, I'm sorry I can't do it. And of course, they could easily go literally across the street in a second and get another cake ordered, right?
Sure.
But they could they could organize a protest, couldn't they, against him?
You could boycott anybody you want.
You could
and they
boycott
do.
him. They could give him bad Yelp reviews. They could. So he would have to still deal with the consequences.
In fact, it's worse
Yeah.
than that, because we're seeing whenever Christians take a stand, Jack Phillips, my client, is Kathy
Yeah.
Miller here? Can you stand up, Kathy? Kathy is a baker in Bakersfield who also refused to bake a cake for a lesbian couple. Now, what we see with Jack Phillips, but with Kathy too, the two lesbians a year ago that came to her store and wanted a wedding cake made have been going around with the tape recorder to other places trying to get someone to deny them so that they can immediately go to social media.
Wow.
Which is what they did here. And she was inundated within hours and had the media in her parking lot. They had to shut down all their computers. They had gay pornography that was being sent to them. They had death threats coming down. This all happened within hours of them going to set up this Christian baker wanting a wedding cake 10 months after they even had their ceremony. And we had other wedding vendors say, yeah, they came into our places too when they were tape recording and wanted to know if we would provide them the service. So it's more than just being boycotted. It's actually being threatened.
But the First Amendment wouldn't protect Kathy from that. There may be other laws regarding trespass or harassment or other things that that she may have to help her. Now, one of the nice things, though, I think, is that I think there was a big boycott organized against Chick-fil-A, which kind of backfired because then more people started going there, right?
That's right.
So
the counter boycott made it the biggest day in there.
So this is where we exercise our influence if we want. We support a business that's been under attack or something like that.
And that guy, Phil Robinson on Duck Dynasty, they fired him after he came out in favor of traditional marriage, and the backlash was so quick and so strong they had to immediately rehire him.
So, but I didn't know that background. You're saying that there are people who are not, they don't really care about getting a cake. They care about outing bigots or making people declare one way or another.
So they can make a statement and get some publicity, and they feel move their agenda forward.
Okay, that is very disturbing.
Yes, it's there, and it happened here.
Well, wait, let me give you an example now. What happens if two men in a romantic relationship want to get married in the church?
Well, the one good thing that did come out of Masterpiece is they did make it clear, if it wasn't clear enough already.
They basically said they assumed there's no way they're like of course they couldn't go to a church and force a church minister to do the wedding, right?
Exactly correct.
Yeah.
So that was clear.
Yeah, they did write that there, but I kind of feel like they almost like assumed it, and it would have been nice if it was spelled out. But there is a lot of, there's the Hosanna Tabor case in which that was like an 8-0 case or a 9-0 case. So this was a case about a Lutheran church or school hiring teachers, and basically when it comes to how the church chooses its ministers and internal governance in the church, the courts have actually been very much deferential. They basically say we can't.
The ministerial exception.
Yeah.
And the question is, how far does it extend? Is it going to extend to someone who's not a minister?
Right.
Someone who is a layperson teaching theology? Yes, it will. But will it extend to a history teacher?
What if they teach math in a Catholic school?
Well, but recently case says that it applies to the pianist or the organist because they're part of the
liturgy, the worship.
Exactly correct. But is it going to apply to someone who's just an administrator who has nothing to do with the ministerial function?
So they did give it, but then it has to be qualified as a minister, or there has to be an analysis of whether they fit within that exemption.
Exactly correct.
All right. Let's go back to Justice Kennedy.
Okay.
So, you read his opinion there, you read it in Oberfeld. I think it was the previous case in which they overturned laws that criminalized sodomy, which he had written. Lawrence, all right, versus Texas.
2003.
So, what Kennedy seems to be really concerned about is that homosexuals not suffer from stigma, that they not be made to feel as less than or second-class citizens. How should our society weigh that interest against religious freedom?
Well, again, religious freedom is a constitutional right. It's the first freedom in the First Amendment. It should take a higher priority for that reason alone, and historically, it always has. There's no guarantee in the Constitution that someone is not going to be offended by someone else's religious belief. We live in a pluralistic society. We're supposed to be tolerant of each other, and that means sometimes you may not agree with someone, But just because you don't agree, you can't say I'm offended, and that person has to stop doing
Well,
what they do or
isn't
change their
there,
belief system.
isn't there a decision in the free speech cases that kind of say, like, you know, free speech means that you have a right to offend people almost
That's
sometimes.
right. There's no heckler's veto. You can't stop someone from speaking because you don't agree with their message.
Okay. I think obviously, though, in our own conduct and speech, we do want to speak in a way that is charitable and true and everything like that.
We want to be reflective of who we are as Christian people. The court said they want people putting up signs, you know, gays not welcome here, that type of thing, and we shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
We want to be able to witness in such a way, not in a way that we're necessarily sending a message of approval, but sending a message that, you know, everyone's welcome.
So even if you have to say no because your conscience won't allow you to participate in this, you can say no in a nice way,
That's
or
exactly
a respectful
correct.
way.
And we're expected to.
Okay, you alluded to this before, but I want to talk more about it a little bit. So many people say opposing same-sex marriage is similar to opposing interracial marriage, right? So at I guess it was in Virginia, at some point, Caucasian and African American couldn't marry. It was anti-miscegenation laws, I guess. And that was, the Supreme Court in Loving, right, said that that was an unconstitutional law. So why is the parallel here?
Race was never something that was considered an essential aspect of marriage. You know, what was considered an essential aspect is you had to have a man and a woman who are adults or competent in a consenting relationship capable of having a conjugal union. Okay? That is distinctly different, and not to be crass, but to gay people cannot have a conjugal union in the way that we've always historically
So race was not relevant to marriage, whereas sex or gender is.
Because of the reproductive capacity of men and women in society's interest in marriage was to protect the child that could be the result of that union. But it was never even recognized as a marriage unless it was consummated. They've completely set the whole thing on its head now.
It seems like there's a big... So the new view of marriage, which the court seems to have gone with, is it's kind of a committed romantic relationship. And it's not necessarily connected with having kids.
Currently not even having sex.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so and so then they say sex or gender doesn't matter for it. But they're obviously, it's not the same as the anti-miscegenation laws, because it's a rational connection between sexual complementarity and marriage.
No one ever had a problem until the last 15 years in understanding the reality of the human biology and anatomical system and how parts fit together and all of that. The society has really gone crazy with this issue. And it's wreaked havoc that we're now seeing with all of these cases. When people say, look, I'm not crazy, I'm not going to agree with you on that, that typically doesn't make sense. And from a religious perspective, it offends my sense of morality and my understanding of what God intends for the way that human beings are supposed to live. In the face of that, now we're going to have a rash of all these lawsuits because other people say, I don't care what you think, I insist that you do what I want to do, and they have the 5 votes on the Supreme Court saying they're entitled to it.
Let's talk a little bit about something that's developing even faster than I think homosexual rights developed. Was in California, if you work in like a nursing home and you don't use a person's preferred gender pronoun, is that a crime?
That I can't answer. That I wasn't ready for you to ask.
Okay, sorry,
I don't think it's a crime yet. Now, I know in New York, you can be fined something like $200,000 if you persist in using someone's name or gender that's reflective of their biology instead of their personal preference. So in New York, it is. If it was a crime in California, I'm sure.
Well, I'm going to send you. I think there's something. At least maybe it didn't get signed yet.
Yeah,
but it was at least proposed.
I'm sure it's percolating through the legislature because almost everything is our legislature is so crazy. But I don't think anything has passed. Where I know people are losing their jobs for not recognizing people's preferred gender. I just read an article about a physician in England who said, look, this is not making medical sense. We don't always treat men the same way we treat women. And if a man comes in and says he's a woman, but he needs a certain treatment in a certain way, it could be very different for a man. I'm not going to acknowledge their preferred gender in this situation. any more than I would if they said I'm type A blood when he's really type B. His perception is not going to change his need to get the right type of blood, for Pete's sake. But the doctor lost his job. That's happening. And I've had various people, particularly in the psychological counseling industry, call me and say, they're saying I got to treat this person as though he's a man.
So if you're a psychologist, someone comes to you and they're considered the transgender, they don't identify with their biological sex. What did we just say? I don't think I'd be a good fit for you as a psychotherapist because I don't.
Right now, you stand to lose your job, but there's legislation about to be passed in California, AB 2349, that states that you absolutely cannot provide any treatment for someone that's going to change their sexual orientation or their gender.
You're
so
saying
it's a little different.
Treatment. You're saying that if you wanted to help someone, help their thought process to coincide with their biology, you can't do that anymore. But if you want to lop off body parts and give hormones, you can do that.
That's right.
Okay.
And the way it's written is, you can't engage in any sales of any products that would influence people to not change their gender, which the way it's being interpreted by the legal scholars is the Bible will no longer be offered for sale.
I've heard that's debated as to whether that's the case or whether it has to be something.
Well, the people who are pushing it are saying that's what they want. And they're saying they want to go after these pastors too, who insist on saying that people shouldn't change their gender.
I want to go back to Kathy and Tasty's Bakery.
Tasty's
Bakery. So, Kathy, I'm a big surprised that you're here. I'm glad you're here. So, again, tell us a little more about the background of her case,
Sure.
how you got to be her lawyer, and what happened.
Kathy's a very courageous woman. She was told she should also stop making wedding cakes like Jack Phillips, and she said, no, I make wedding cakes and I'm going to fight for the right to do that. We were blessed to get a good judge in Bakersfield who saw it our way, and she was the first person in the wedding industry in the United States to actually win one of these cases, and the judge said making a wedding cake is a form of expressive speech that's protected under the Constitution. So that decision we got a couple of months ago. The other side, which is Department of Fair Employment and Housing in California, has not backed down. They took up the case of the two lesbians that sued Kathy, but as far as we're concerned, we have an enforceable judgment in that it should stand. But it remains to be seen what position the state's going to take on that. But it was a very well-reasoned decision, and it said she did make arrangements with a gay baker to have the cake made for them by a gay baker, so they were in no way disadvantaged or prejudiced by getting a wedding cake.
And these, Kathy had provided services to this couple before.
Well, not specifically this couple, but she always provides any services to anybody who comes in her shop, including gay people. She's had gay employees in the past, and if someone wants to come in and buy something off the shelf, any type of anniversary cake or birthday cake or whatever, but she has to draw the line with wedding cakes because she's a devout Christian, and like Jack Phillips, she sees marriage as unique, as an institution ordained by God, and it serves a specific purpose, and by definition can only be between one man and one woman. And so if you have a gay person that comes in and they want to have two men put on the top of the cake, two women, that is a message that she cannot agree with. And they go to the ceremony and they assemble the cake. They're there, they're kind of part of it, and she can't do that in good conscience at a same-sex wedding. And again, she suffered a lot of recrimination as a result of that, and a lot of personal attacks and a lot of threats, far more than I've ever experienced. So she's been heroic and courageous, but steadfast and been successful, and shows that we can win these battles, and we have to stand up for our rights. So again, it's been a privilege.
When you say we can't, do you think we can win these battles because of the Constitution, or do you think? Don't you see popular opinion going the other direction?
Here's the problem.
Are we going to become a kind of minority that's considered fringe?
People say you can't legislate morality. That's all we do is legislate morality. It's a matter of whose morality is being legislated, particularly on these cultural issues, and what becomes legal becomes normative. Remember, 2 out of 3 Americans voted against same-sex marriage. They make it legal, and they start teaching it in the schools and shoving it down your throats every 5 minutes, and people become desensitized, or at least they start to throw up their hands. And of course, the younger generation, that's all they know, and they start becoming something of it. So it does change the culture.
Right.
But to a certain extent, it can get to the point there's a pushback. That's why President Trump got elected, and that's why we're getting different judges.
So you're actually hopeful for our nation to sort of recover some traditional morality, to have a religious revival? How do you see that?
There's hope. There's states now recognizing pornography as a public health hazard. There is a movement to change things. Young men, even Time Magazine said they realize pornography has been such a plague they can't have a good relationship with their wives. It gets so bad at a point.
So you think sort of the wages of sin, the consequences of the sexual revolution will be so evident, just in everyone's lives experience the destruction of it, that will cause people to say, well, maybe, like, even the Me Too movement, where all these terrible, these guys are predators taking advantage and pushing themselves on women.
Right.
Does that make people say, maybe we need to go back to more kind of traditional sexual morality?
There's certainly aspects of that, but ultimately truth wins out. I mean,
well,
and Jesus wins
in the long run. But there could be centuries. the church in the beginning was persecuted for centuries.
Yeah.
So
I'm not naive about it.
Yeah.
We're in for a long, hard fight. It's not going to change overnight. I wish I could say it would. I'm not overly optimistic it's going to change overnight. I am overly optimistic
let me
it will
ask you
ultimately
this.
prevail.
So most of our...
I'm not sure it'll be in my lifetime.
My sense is we have a crowd here that largely agrees with us, however, and I hope we have some that don't, but I know from my parishioners that there's members of their families who have same-sex attraction, that is becoming so... the acceptance of this and Christianity being seen as hateful and intolerant and bigoted, that's increasing so much that even faithful people who come here, I think they sometimes have a hard time broaching these issues with other people. They may get invited, their coworkers having a same-sex wedding, they get invited to go, and I counsel them not to. But what would you say for just regular people and their social relations, their work relations, about how they can live their faith, and even when it's going to get a lot of backlash for it?
I think you need to stay close to good priests like you and the sacraments, and ask for the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and ask for clarity and conviction and courage on these issues. I find Eucharistic adoration helps provide that for me, so you know what to say and how to say it in the right circumstance. I mean, you start advocating around the office on your Christian beliefs, you're going to get fired in a lot of places. So I'm not necessarily saying that, but certainly, around the dinner table at Thanksgiving or whatever, so that you say the right things in the right way, not to create unnecessary division. But Jesus said, I came to divide, and I think this is, families, and I think this is what he was talking about. Are you going to be faithful to him and his word, or are you going to do what's easy and go along because you've got some family members telling you this is the way it's going to be if you want to continue to be in a good relationship with them. So there will be, unfortunately, I've had it in my own family, not my immediate family, but cousins, some divisions that way, unfortunately. But you have to ultimately stand up for Christ and stand up for the truth. And you don't need to be mean-spirited about it, but it's their decision if they want to separate themselves from
the job thing's a big deal. So I'm starting to worry about, actually, I think I'm the safest person in terms of job security. Because like you said, the courts give a lot of protection for the clergy, but no, seriously, so my sister is a doctor, and I remember when she was, the residency process, they're in med school, and they kind of list their top schools they want to go to medical residency, and then the schools kind of choose them. And she ended up getting matched up with the University of North Carolina. But my sister's a very faithful Catholic. She goes to Mass every day. And she has a well-formed conscience. And she wanted to go into family practice. And, she started talking to them more about things. And she said, I wouldn't prescribe contraception. And that's a lot of doctors in family practice, they do quite a bit of that, you know. So they didn't know what to make of it. But they ended up accommodating her, and they said,
Well, that's
yeah,
great.
they said, we'll make it work. Someone else will have to write those prescriptions.
So that's
you know?
great. If
And
you-
it was a moment of great anguish, because she might end up missing out on this whole matching process and not
That's
being able
right.
to do a residency. And then I know so many people, I feel like that maybe Christians shouldn't even go into the wedding industry at all. Don't be photographers or florists or
Well,
bakers.
unfortunately, it is creating a disincentive.
Yeah.
And some of these people that have lost these cases, like the photographer in New Mexico, Elaine Photography, had to actually leave the field. I mean,
Yeah.
she lost her
I mean,
case in the
these are
highest court.
huge consequences. This
Huge
is your
consequences
people's
that-
livelihoods.
Yeah,
They're-
this woman, we haven't talked about it, but Arlene's Flowers, she's got a staggering fine, and they're suing her personally. She could lose her house.
Was that the case that was remanded and they were instructed to apply Masterpiece
That's
Bake
correct.
Shop to it? Okay.
That's right. It's a woman sweet old woman in Washington State.
Okay.
And the latest one, I sent you an article today. There's 2 young women calligraphers in Arizona. They stand to go to jail for 6 months because that particular statute has criminal penalties if you discriminate against gay people. And they don't want to do the
How
wedding
can we,
invitations.
so your Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund, there are other groups that work for religious liberty.
Sure.
You know, I feel like, in a way, it could be any of us. Any of us could get in one of these lawsuits.
At any time.
And so we should have solidarity.
All of us will be called on the carpet at some point, in some
But
way.
we should have solidarity with each other,
Yes.
I think, and support the attorneys like you that are doing this, because your victories for Kathy and Tasty's Bakery is a benefit to all of us as well. And we're in solidarity. We're in solidarity as brothers and sisters in Christ. So I would encourage some of you who haven't planned out all your tithing this year, because all of you give 10%, right? To think about Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund and the work that they do, and there's some other good legal organizations that do that. Because just imagine if you were facing the loss of your livelihood and everything, you know, and I'd want someone like Chuck actually to be on my side, for sure.
Thank you, Father. Appreciate it.
Good. I think I'd like to go to get some questions now.
Okay,
Is that
great.
okay?